Let's talk about it and more with Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent. I mean, she's some woman, isn't she, Jennifer Lopez? Because I remember when she sang at Joe Biden's second inauguration, was it 2021 when she sang? I think it was. She did a great job there, and the Latina element came out then. She's trying to use it this time for Kamala Harris, clearly.
Yeah. Biden's only inauguration, Sheila. Remember, he's only had one term in the Oval Office. But look, I mean, I think that was an extraordinary intervention by Jennifer Lopez. We already knew that she was going to be campaigning with Kamala Harris, and indeed Cardi B, I think, is going to be campaigning with Kamala Harris. And the big question as we head towards the closing rallies here is whether Taylor Swift might appear at Kamala Harris's final rally, which is going to take place on Monday night in Pennsylvania. There are once again rumours about that, but absolutely no indication as to whether it's actually going to happen or not. But I mean, to have Jennifer Lopez getting herself involved in the campaign at this particular moment after not just the racist joke that was told by comedian Tony Hinchcliffe at Madison Square Garden last Sunday, Donald Trump's rally there, but the litany of other speakers in the warm-up act to Donald Trump, who also engaged in racist tropes, misogyny, inflammatory comments. It was literally Donald Trump's Make America Great Again movement, with no guardrails, no restraints. Absolutely no one had vetted any of these speeches. And it may well have been the moment in which Donald Trump and those warm-up speakers particularly threw away his prospects of winning the keys to the Oval Office again. I mean, you could hear in that clip from Jennifer Lopez, and there were other parts of the speech where she was almost pleading with people to see sense, as she would put it, and get out there and back Kamala Harris. And when you consider that there are...
I was going to say, it's worth noting on the Puerto Rican question. I read that the Puerto Rican newspaper El Nuevo Dia, which has a readership of 7 million, decided yesterday, I think it was, to back Harris. Is that feels significant? Is it significant?
Yeah, I think that the community has shifted. I mean, there were very popular Puerto Rican radio hosts who were saying earlier in the week, by Monday, as early as Monday, that it was now all over for Trump in the Puerto Rican community. And you have to remember that in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, where if this is a close election, the keys to the White House may end up being awarded, there are 500,000 Puerto Rican voters. Now, if you look at the outcome of the last presidential election, it's estimated that between 50 and 75,000 votes may have made the difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So if you've got 500,000 votes of Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania alone, that has the potential, certainly for those Puerto Ricans who have not yet engaged in early voting, to make a big difference. Important to underscore, though, that all of this, even when that comedian was on his feet last Sunday, I think already 35 million Americans had voted. The number today is in excess of 62 million, almost 63 million Americans. So I do think it is important to underscore, we all keep talking about election day next Tuesday. It isn't, it's not really election day. I mean, it is election day, but it's the day the election ends. It's the last day of voting, not the big one anymore.
And, you know, for all the people delighted to see J-Lo on the stage and listen to her speech, and delighted to see the glamour of Hollywood, and wondering whether Taylor Swift will be the sort of cherry on the cake, there are just as many Americans, or certainly huge numbers of Americans, who look at that stuff and think, oh, God, Hollywood elite, Washington elite, not interested. Give me Donald Trump dressed as a garbage man every day of the week.
Yes, and that's why last Sunday was such a disaster for Donald Trump, because he had a really effective week on the campaign trail. The previous 7 days, I think without question, had been victorious for Trump and pretty lousy for Kamala Harris. She spent 2 days holed up in the White House, choreographing the final days of her campaign, doing a couple of interviews in which I think she didn't perform particularly strongly. Donald Trump, by contrast, had been manning the French fry machine at McDonald's. He had been sitting down with a group of African-American male barbers and their clients in the Bronx, underscoring his belief that he is about to win a record number of votes for a Republican nominee among black men. And then, of course, he went to North Carolina and was visiting victims of Hurricane Helene. So he was very much the action man of American politics in that week. He's done the same thing this week by responding to Joe Biden's insistence that the only garbage that he sees out there are Trump's supporters.
Not helpful, Joe.
So you saw him donning, I mean, at the worst possible moment, Sheila. News of those comments spread as Kamala Harris was taking to the podium on the ellipse here to make her big speech. I mean, there's a reason the Kamala Harris campaign managers have spurned efforts by Joe Biden to get on the campaign trail, join her and campaign for her in separate appearances. And it's precisely because of kind of foot in mouth disease. And that's what he had in that moment when he was addressing Latino activists who were trying to get the vote out for Kamala Harris across the country. So Trump then tried to capitalize on it and has continued trying to capitalize on it. But he keeps being caught up by the darker aspects of his own nature. Last Sunday at Madison Square Garden, and then last night in an interview with the far-right polemicist Tucker Carlson, in which Donald Trump actually seemed to suggest that he would like to see how former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, the daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney, would fare if she was placed in front of a firing squad. I mean, another completely unforced error, something he absolutely did not need to say, and it's going to colour the final weekend of this campaign.
And let's talk about the polls. I mean, you know, polls schmoles sometimes when it comes to elections, I suppose, but it's such a difficult one to call. I keep hearing it described as going to be a photo finish, and that's what makes it so nerve-wracking, I suppose, for everybody.
Yeah, and it may not be a photo finish. I mean, I'm at the point where I simply have no idea what's going to happen here. I think that any of the possible outcomes could occur. We might see a Kamala Harris landslide on Tuesday night. We might find ourselves by, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning UK time saying, OK, it's all over. The networks have called the race. Kamala Harris is the president-elect. We might, I think it's unlikely, see a Donald Trump landslide, or we might see a really, really close race where by 5 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday UK time, we have no idea who the next president is going to be. And it could be days before we find out if we're down to counting the votes and the postal ballots in the individual areas of Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin or wherever it happens to be. I mean, I've spent the last 3 election cycles, the morning after the night before, saying I'm never going to look at an opinion poll again, and then you find yourself in an election cycle poring over these opinion polls. And it's really, really difficult to know. I mean, if you look at the early voting data, Democrats have some reason to be encouraged by the early voting data because there are more Democrats who have participated than Republicans, and they argue that a greater proportion of those Democrat early voters are voting for Kamala Harris than the percentage of Republican. Yeah. So, well, and also it's about disaffected Republicans. I mean, Kamala Harris, by putting all of this this focus over the last few days on the future of democracy, that's an effort to peel disaffected Republicans away from Donald Trump, because that's where she and her strategists believe they may be able to eke out the difference, fueled, of course, by women voters who are concerned about abortion rights, the glee of grassroots Democrats that she is the candidate and not Joe Biden. But you've got to be careful about reading too much into that early voting data. So it's very hard to know what we're going to see. And that, of course, is why it's both exciting and deeply tense. And this is all taking place in a very brittle country. Around in this neighborhood, I mean, I'm right a block away from the White House, and businesses in this neighborhood are being boarded up ahead of Tuesday night because people are concerned about what might take place on the streets.